Hi once again, Drumsenses. It's me again with our usual monthly update. I thought I would do a few sessions on a very good book that can solve a few teaching problems, better put, answer a few teaching questions. The book is called Working the Inner Clock by Maturano from America. I don't have the book actually in front of me to show you the front cover, but I've got copies of the charts here. The chart I'm going to show you today is called Ionosphere Spring. Okay, and if you look, you can see that there isn't much to read. They're really just downbeats and upbeats, forming very common phrases with long tied notes. But there's no groove written as such. Well, there's no groove written at all. The idea is that, to start with, it's a nice little reading exercise because they're all sort of downbeats, upbeats, tied notes. In other words, they're kind of figures. They're well-known phrases. So what the student's actually reading is the phrases themselves, whilst maintaining some kind of groove. Which brings me to the next thing that these lessons are good for, this book is good for. You can teach setups. You can encourage the student to set up these phrases, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. And of course, it's a good way of explaining and, as in one and, two and. It's also a good way of exploiting E and A, one E and A. This book contains a lot of this kind of thing. And of course the title of the book, Working the Inner Clock, this is excellent for working on your timekeeping and your feel for where beat one is. What Phil does throughout these tracks is he takes a phrase, moves it around, or he takes a particular hit, like the and of beat one, moves it to the and of beat two, then the and of beat three, the and, and that kind of thing. And it just really helps you to maintain an inner pulse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate track number one, and then while doing this I'm going to give you some input on how I use this as a lesson as well. So this tune is called Ionosphere Spring. You clearly can't see the chart from where you are, so you're going to have to take my word for it, but I will explain what happens as we go through. It starts with on beat to off beat like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's what we're reading, 1 and 2 and. We're reading that. He adds little notes as we go down, like 1, 2 and 1 and finally 1 and 2 and. So the four phrases to work with on the first page are 1, and then the second phrase is 1, the third phrase is 1, and the fourth phrase is 1. Now what he does then is he takes those phrases and moves them to the second part of the bar. So where you had 1, 2 and, you've now got 1, 2, 3, 4 and he takes the same phrases, but he's moved them to the second part of the bar. Then there's a 4-bar phrase where the number of ands you play in the bar increases from 1, 2, 3, 4 and 2, 3, 4 and 2 and 1 and then we have a little guitar solo and we go back to the head and do it again. Now at that point I'll stop the music and explain what I'm going to do next. So to start with, I'm going to play up to there's a DC alcoda here. I'm going to play up to there. The tune will go back to the head, but I'm going to stop there, okay? So this is called Ionosphere Spring. 1, 2, 3. So here's the first one. Just keeping time. so you get the idea. Now the tune's now shifted back. We've done the DC, we're now back to the beginning. And what I always get my students to do here is to try and set the phrases up a bit more. Now, rather than try and explain, it's probably best if I just do it. But basically I'm saying, second time round, you have a lot more freedom. Don't maybe stick to the 2 and 4 quite so much. Do a few more fills and try and set up the phrases. How much of this you get your student to do depends on your student's ability. If they're quite advanced but have never done this kind of reading before, which I've had a few students like that, you can give them a bit of license and say, well, you know, kind of go for it. If you're actually trying to teach setups, if you've got a budding student who you think would benefit from this idea of learning about setups, then maybe just keep it a bit simpler. I'll try and do it this time, first time now. I'll do it fairly simply and just demonstrate some standard setup ideas. Before I do any of this, it's worth pointing out that I think this is one of the things that drummers do best. The number of times I've heard a really good chart, like a really good band with a really good drummer playing a really good chart, and it's the drummer that's doing all the improvising, it's the drummer that's doing all the fills. I don't believe that composers and arrangers write every single fill out for drummers. I think quite often it just says fill, or they just say to the drummer, you know, let loose a bit here. Everyone else in the orchestra has everything written out for them. They daren't stray from that, whereas the drummer is given a chance to put some fills and set some phrases up. And it's only drummers that get to do this, and I think this is what drummers really do well. This is part of the nature of our instrument. Okay, so I'm going to go from the head. I'm doing the DC, and I'll demonstrate some fairly easy setup ideas. Okay, apart from getting tangled up a couple of times. Right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the whole track again, and this time I'll take a little bit more license with the whole track. So on the DC, what I'm taking as my remit is to really open it out quite a lot. One, two, three. you go. It's a kind of general idea. Apologies for any mistakes I made. I tried an upward fill and got tangled up in the sticks. Always a good idea to try these things out at home. Just make sure you communicate to your students that try them out at home so you don't mess them up in the studio. Final point, you may have noticed the amount of left foot timekeeping I was doing throughout most of that. I think it's very important for the student to ground where the time is, despite the fact in theory we're working on our inner clock, so in theory we shouldn't be using the left foot as a timekeeper because it's another sound. We might not want to hear that sound all the way through when we're playing this in a recording session. I think that's a valid point. A piano player wouldn't beat the piano with their left hand to keep time. Similarly, whenever we play the hi-hat, we need to be aware that it's a sound in its own right, so we might not want to hear that clicking all the way through. But in terms of practicing, in terms of giving a lesson, I think it's good to say to the student, let's ground the time, let's make sure we know where the time, let's feel the time in our left foot. And then later on we can learn to abandon that and just rely on our rhythmic judgment. Okay, there you go, it's the first track. We'll do a few of these in the next few sessions. Working the Inner Clock by Phil Maturano. It's worth looking up. I think it's on our website, and if it's not, it soon will be. Okay, cheers.